Today on the Hour of Power, Pastor Jim Penner welcomes Lisa Gibson. Lisa's brother Ken was killed in the 1988 terrorist attack of Pan Am Flight 103. Her story of healing and forgiveness has been captured in the book Life in Death. Also today, inspirational music by Debbie McClendon Smith and the Crystal Cathedral Worship Team and Choir. Then, Pastor Sheila continues the message series, Be a New Attitude, the Beatitudes of Christ, with her message, 2020 Eyesight. If you need a lift today, you've tuned to the right program. Join us today for the best hour on television, the Hour of Power from the Crystal Cathedral.
Join us as we worship the King of Kings. Joyful, joyful, we adore you, God, glory, Lord.
Jesus was asked a question, how many times should I forgive my brother? Up to 7 times? And Jesus replied, no, up to 70 times 7. Jesus wants us to forgive. Now, I hear a lot of people talking about forgiveness, and I even talk about forgiveness. And at the same time, I see those same persons, or I see myself, continuing to talk ill about the person we're supposed to forgive. We fall into that habit as human beings. And then I received this book, Life in Death. And I met Lisa Gibson over here. And Lisa, her brother Ken was killed in the Pan Am 103 bombing over Lockerbie, Scotland. You remember when Pan Am 103 went down in 1988, correct? She lost her brother to a terrorist attack when that plane went down. And Lisa could have remained in bitterness and anger at the terrorists who did this. And that's not what happened. God transformed her heart into one of the most forgiving persons I've ever met in my life. Let's welcome Lisa Gibson and hear a little bit of her story. God bless you. Life and Death, a journey from terrorism to triumph. Tell us a little bit, remind us a little bit what happened with Pan Am 103.
Well, in 1988, my brother was one of 260 people killed on the terrorist bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie. It was the single worst terrorist attack against Americans prior to September 11th. And my brother was actually on his way home for Christmas. He'd been away serving our country in Germany and been away for 2 years when it happened. And it ended up turning our life upside down, honestly. I was, at the time, 18 years of age, so I was a Christian and I knew what the Bible said about how I should respond, but it took me a while to get to that point. I had to really wrestle through a lot of what God needed to do in my own life in the process, and that's really what the book is about. It's the story of me learning how to forgive, but then also taking it to the next level and doing what Romans 12 says, which is to love your enemies and to overcome evil with good.
Now, you were a Christian at 18 when this tragedy happened. Yeah. Were you going through this big struggle of why? I mean,
yeah.
weren't you crying out to the Lord of saying, this shouldn't happen?
Absolutely. It was a crisis of faith in many ways, where I really had to wrestle with the Lord and get to the revelation personally that God is still good in the midst of tragedy. And so it took me through a journey of trying to find answers, and I really feel like the Lord taught me a lot in that process about who He is and the sovereignty, and that ultimately in the midst of tragedy and hard times and bad things, that God can be glorified if we allow Him to be.
Now, through this process, you became an attorney. Mm-hmm. And you decided early on that you were going to learn a lot more about the Islamic faith and the people and what was behind a motivation to do what happened. Where did that journey take you?
Well, I actually started out doing my senior thesis on Islamic terrorism, trying to figure out what was at the motivation in the heart of this, and figured if I could figure that out, maybe I could prevent these kinds of things. And so I learned all about it, but ended up in that moment having one of those kind of dialogues with the Lord, saying, okay, God, I get it, but now what? And it was one of those times where the Lord spoke very clearly to my heart. He said, Lisa, He's like, we live in a fallen world, and the only answer is Jesus Christ. So I knew that if I was to do something about this, the most effective thing I could do would be to take Jesus to the people and let them know that He is a source of forgiveness.
So you could have just written a letter to the terrorist, the Libyan who was responsible or who they convicted for this crime, and offered forgiveness. But you went a lot further than that.
Yeah.
You started reaching out to the Libyan people.
Yeah, I wrote a letter of forgiveness to the guy responsible, and that's kind of what started me on the path of going there. I wanted to take the word in Romans 12 where it says to overcome evil with good concretely. And so I went to Libya on a personal reconciliation trip. And it was on that trip that as I would share my story and say, as a Christian, I'm called to forgive and to love my enemies and overcome evil with good, that I began to become envisioned on the redemptive power of living that out. And I'd hear people's stories about what their lives were like, and I wanted to do something to help, which brought me then back to the United States to start this ministry called the Peace and Prosperity Alliance. I had been working in Libya for about 7 years and serving there, and I had the chance, after actually meeting with Gaddafi myself.
You did actually get to meet with him.
I did meet with him.
What did you say to him?
I basically shared with him basically what the Bible says. I blessed him. Romans 12 is very clear that we're to bless our enemies, to try to find a way to overcome evil with good. And I shared with him how my desire was to focus on reconciliation with Libya and serve there. And then basically gave him a gift. I gave him a cross pen. And it was something real small, but in that moment, you could tell he was authentically touched. And out of that then just catalyzed me to serve more, which is how I got involved in speaking in Libya in June. I spoke to a crowd of about 100,000 people in Freedom Square during the revolution, and just to let them know that they're not alone, that we're both victims, we're all victims of terrorism at the hands of Gaddafi. I think that sometimes we think there's power in holding on to loss, but there's so much more power, a redemptive power, in really forgiving and walking out what it is concrete to love.
Can we thank Lisa for being here today? God bless you. Thank you very much. Wonderful. If you'd like to meet Lisa, she's going to be over here in front of the Welcome Center after the service. You're welcome to go meet her, maybe get a copy of her book, or maybe just shake her hand and get to know a little bit more about forgiveness. I think that would be great for everybody to meet Lisa.
Be a New Attitude, the Beatitudes of Christ. With her message, 2020 Eyesight, Pastor Jim Penner welcomes Lisa Gibson. Lisa's brother Ken was killed in the 1988 terrorist attack of Pan Am Flight 103. Her story of forgiveness has been captured in the book Life in Death. Join us every week for the best hour on television, the Hour of Power from the Crystal Cathedral, this Sunday.